G'day guys, and today it's time for an Australian-centric coronavirus update. Now the number of cases in Australia has ticked upwards over the last few days, rising from approximately 26 to 43, and we've had our first fatality, an 85-year-old man in Western Australia. So just today there's been another suspected fatality. A 95-year-old woman has died at the Dorothy Henderson Lodge Care Facility, Macquarie Park in Sydney. Now this is an old folks home, an aged care facility, and obviously this represents a great threat because people who are dying from coronavirus, I believe the average age is in the low 70s. It is the elderly who are most vulnerable to this disease, and it has been confirmed that coronavirus has infected this aged care facility. We have a Sydney aged care nurse, aged 50-year-old, and an 82-year-old elderly resident have both tested positive for coronavirus. So the 50-year-old nurse was caring for the elderly man and 12 other residents at the Baptist Care Dorothy Henderson Lodge aged care facility, which is located near Macquarie University and Macquarie Shopping Centre. Now, something that's very important to note, and this is sort of the sign that we've reached the second stage of infection within Australia. This 50-year-old nurse had not recently travelled outside Australia, but had begun experiencing flu-like symptoms from roughly February 24. So that's about a week ago. Now this is a big problem. This is a huge problem because this means that we've begun to have native transmissions within Australia, person to person. So whereas before we were having people, stepping off the plane, getting tested, or getting the sniffles, they're coming back from Iran, they're coming back from China, these sorts of places, they're coming home, they're experiencing flu-like symptoms and sending themselves into the doctor. Well, this woman has not travelled overseas, so we can't say, oh, she got the disease from China. She's clearly caught this virus from someone else, and at this point in time, we don't know who that person was. There has been a cluster of cases within sort of 4-kilometre area around Macquarie. We have one 50-year-old doctor, this 50-year-old female nurse, and a handful of others. So clearly, if we're going to do some sort of epidemiological study, which is again surely being undertaken, there'll be some kind of common factor. These people have all been somewhere. They've all bumped into someone. Someone is spreading the coronavirus to these people, and we just don't know about them. Because again, and I talk about this in every coronavirus update, coronavirus is asymptomatic in that you don't have any symptoms at all, not even the sniffles, yet still transmissible for up to 2 weeks. So you will have this period of time, up to 2 weeks, where people are wandering around perfectly fine on the surface, but they're fully capable of shedding the virus and infecting other people. And even when you become symptomatic, just like this lady, most of the time you're only experiencing mild flu-like symptoms. You might think it's just the sniffles, you might not think very much of it, and again, you're running around shedding the virus and potentially infecting more people. And it is certainly a problem in terms of mortality rates that this coronavirus has gotten into an aged care facility, because as I mentioned before, the elderly, it seems, are most at risk from this disease. Now, isolation and containment is being attempted by the Australian government. As I mentioned previously, that 50-year-old doctor, when he was confirmed to be infected, 75 of the other hospital staff he was working with were asked to be put into isolation and this sort of thing. But unfortunately, this sort of voluntary self-isolation, it isn't like China where you get welded and shut inside your apartment or locked away or something like that. It's entirely that. It's voluntary, and people may not necessarily follow it, as we've seen down in Tasmania. So, unfortunately, a man in Tasmania who has confirmed to have coronavirus actually went grocery shopping when he was supposed to be in self-isolation at home. So this 40-year-old who had been returning from Iran, he wasn't actually a native transmission, who tested positive for the virus on Monday and has been in isolation in hospital since. State health authorities admitted the man went to Woolworths, which is a shopping centre in Australia, at Wellington Street in Lancaster on Sunday at 10 p.m. for about 15 minutes on his way home after being treated in hospital. Quote, "The man did visit the supermarket after being provided with information about self-quarantine," State Public Health Director Mark Veitch told reporters on Wednesday. "I'm confident the public health processes were followed appropriately, and it's disappointing the man didn't follow them precisely." So yes, this is unfortunately the case. People who aren't taking this seriously, or they are resentful of the fact that they need to quarantine themselves, that maybe just really wanted a packet of smokes or something, he's potentially gone in and affected a whole bunch of people, because again, who did he come into contact with? And again, we need to think about the fact that coronavirus can survive on surfaces for at least 4 to 5 days, and I have seen some reports talking about 9 days. So it is unfortunate this is the case, but again, we don't want to be like China with its brutal dictatorship, censorious ways, welding people inside their apartments, and all sorts of things. So when we're talking about obviously epidemiological studies and things, what the Australian government is doing, and I'm sure your government is doing something very similar, unless you live in some third world country, is when we find out someone who has coronavirus, we're obviously looking to see where they've been and this sort of thing. And unfortunately, with all these people flying home, it's a big problem for incubating the virus, because obviously you're packing a lot of people together very closely on trains and planes and that sort of thing. So this man who flew back from Iran, he was sitting on a flight back from Milan to Malaysia and then to Melbourne, and health authorities are running around trying to contact people who are sitting near him. So they've got into contact with 13 or 15 people sitting on the man. But again, there's too many people, because you go from Iran to Malaysia, and just because there were 15 people sitting near him, who says he didn't get up, walk to the bathroom on the plane and shed the virus down the other end of the plane? How many people were on this plane? How many people were in the airport when he went through? How many people were on potentially public transport that he may or may not have caught? Did he get a taxi? Did he get an Uber? It's unfortunately basically impossible to track down everyone this man came into contact with. And what do we know about coronavirus is that it's highly infectious. So the average number of people being infected by coronavirus, it depends on the source you're looking at. I've seen 2.2 people infected per person. I've seen 3.4. I've seen 3.6. Even if we take that low estimate, 2.2, that's still a very infectious disease once we look at some other diseases and that sort of thing. So containment and isolation are not the be all and end all. They're not going to be some sort of magic solution to the problem. We should expect coronavirus to get worse in Australia. We should expect the number of cases to continue ticking up, especially now that we have native transmissions. Again, it's really important to note that this 50-year-old female nurse at this aged care facility had not travelled overseas, was not returning from China, from Iran, from any of these places. She caught the coronavirus from someone else in Australia, which means that native transmission is now underway in Australia, and we should expect the number of cases to begin to tick steadily upwards before we may reach some sort of exponential explosion, as we're seeing in, unfortunately, in South Korea, in Italy certainly, and potentially Japan, some other European countries. We're seeing the numbers tick up by hundreds in countries like France and Germany every day, and potentially many more hundreds in Italy and Iran, this sort of thing. Australia is very lucky in that we don't share a land border. I feel very sorry for the people of Europe right now, because you've got many cases in Italy, rising number of cases in Germany and France and Spain, as I talked about. And with that Shenzhen zone, and with the amount of trade and travel that goes between all these nations, they're so interconnected, it's basically impossible to quarantine your nation, because they're just these borders between European countries are so porous. Australia is very lucky that we do not share a land border with anyone. People can't just wander across into Australia. If you want to try and get to Australia, you go by boat, and unfortunately we have radar and we will catch you every time. So Australia is very fortunate in this, but again, don't take that as some sort of invincible shield against coronavirus. It's here. Native transmissions are underway, and again, as I repeat in every single video, now is the time to prep up. We've already seen videos and images coming out of the media of shelves being cleared out across Australia in several locations. People are grabbing toilet paper, people are grabbing alcohol, disinfectant, all this sort of stuff, and you are at risk of missing out if you do not act now. You are at risk of price gouging, which is a disgusting act, but it will happen. It happened during the recent bushfire crisis. I see no reason why people won't attempt to take advantage of human misery right now. And you also want to avoid a violent confrontation at the store that you may or may not go to. And apparently there are videos coming out of Italy of essentially people fighting over the last bag of pasta and this sort of thing. It would bear well, especially if you have dependents like children, you have a partner, you have elderly people to take care of, a family. Now is the time to prep. It is basically almost too late. You're running out of time. There's already been food runs because people are getting spooked. And if you don't do now, you may miss out. And if you need to self-isolate yourself, you'll be uncomfortable. The reason why I'm encouraging people to prep right now, it's not, the danger is not from coronavirus at this point in time. The danger is from missing out on food, being affected by price gouging, getting into a violent situation at a store when you finally found a place with supplies. It pays to be prepared. And again, as I also mentioned, say for example you stock up on a bunch of food, some disinfectant and this sort of thing, and thankfully for whatever reason coronavirus is contained, it's isolated, it's quarantined, it's cured, there's a vaccine, whatever. Well, you haven't really lost any money or wasted any resources, this sort of thing, because you can just cycle out your prep. So for example, in my prep, the first bit of item of food that's going to go off is my peanut butter. So in a year, my peanut butter will expire, and you know what? I'll just eat it. So I haven't really lost any money, because as my food continually expires, I'll just start eating it. And if I don't use my water, I'll just put it in the garden or I drink it. There's nothing to lose by prepping now, but I think you have a whole lot of potential pain in the future if you don't act now. And now is the time to act. We've reached the secondary stage of infection in Australia, which is native transmissions between people rather than just people returning from overseas. If you do not prep up now, it may be too late. So what we've seen, especially down here in Wollongong, there's been a suspected case at the university. That's enough to get people to go out and panic buy, stock up on supplies and this sort of thing. In closing, I encourage everyone to keep up with the coronavirus. I myself are daily checking the updates and this sort of thing, listening to the comments and thoughts of independent content creators online. I'm not merely trusting the media nowadays, because the media is getting its information from the World Health Organization, which by extension means they're getting their information from authoritarian states such as China, which is very obviously obscuring and hiding the number of cases it has, and Iran, which may be obscuring and hiding the number of cases we have. We have reports that is occurring. I simply cannot trust the official coronavirus numbers, even though I am checking the official updates. I don't trust them because they're so flawed, because the number of cases that we should be seeing from China rising every day is not occurring. You look at how many cases are being added in places like Italy every day, then you have a look in China, and the growth rate is very small, and that is just frankly, I can't suspend my belief that much. But again, it's good to have at least a rough stab of what's going on by keeping up with the updates. More countries are being affected every day. There is no containment on this disease. It will only get worse, and I think it bears well to prepare now. So I wish everyone good luck in the future. Prep up now, don't be sorry later. And as always, thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.